ටවුන් එකේ විෂන් කෑකට ගියා නම් ඉවරයිනේ.
Vision Care. විශ්වාසනීය දැක්ම.
As a twin deficit country, the central bank governor pointed out the unsustainable budget deficit and the unsustainable deficit in the current account of the balance of payments that should be urgently addressed. According to the governor, from the 1970s to 2000s, Sri Lanka has been collecting 19 to 20% of GDP as revenue, but it slipped to 11.5% in 2014 and now stand at around 13.8%. In this context, what would be the ideal scenario for Sri Lanka's balance of payment situation?
Total expenditure is about 20% of GDP. Now, if you compare that with our comparator countries, that is an acceptable level of expenditure. Now, one can debate whether the quality of expenditure is good as it should be, but the overall level is okay. If we want to have 20% of GDP expenditure, we have to take into account the fact that the overall budget deficit that we can afford to run without having an unsustainable debt problem is about 3 to 3.5% of GDP. Combination of domestic and foreign borrowings, but at a level which doesn't get us into a very onerous and unsustainable debt situation. So if you have expenditure of 20% of GDP and a budget deficit of 3 or 3.5% of GDP, we have to get revenue up to about 16.5% of GDP. So that is really the target. And that's where the Customs Department comes in, because clearly you are one of the 3 major revenue earning departments.
The governor went on to explain how Sri Lanka ran into the second of the twin deficits, that is the current account of the balance of payments. In 2000, Sri Lanka's exports as a percentage of GDP was 33.3%, but fell to 12.6% of GDP by 2015. Just as the island nation allowed exports to come down, what has happened to the debt structure? By 2004, only 3.9% of Sri Lanka's total debt was non-concessional. It eventually went up to 7.3% in 2005, and today commercial debt alone stands at 54.8% of GDP.
Now, there's nothing wrong with borrowing, but you have to use that money productively. It has to go in to projects and expenditures which yield a high enough rate of return to pay back the debt. And if you're borrowing abroad, that money must be used to earn or save foreign exchange. Instead, we put the money often into low-yielding or very minimal yielding projects, and also non-tradables, that is, projects which didn't earn or save foreign exchange. So that's why we are now in the mess we are in today. On the budget deficit, Customs as a major revenue earning institution has a key role to play in helping us get out of that problem. And when it comes to the current account deficit, the only way we can get out of it is through export transformation.